Have you ever felt that little almost mischievous pull to do something you know you shouldn't? Maybe like stepping onto that perfect grass even when the sign says keep off.
Yeah, or maybe, playfully swiping a fry off a friend's plate.
Yeah.
Just to see what they do.
Exactly. It's not because you need to cross the lawn or you're actually starving. It's this weird little thrill you get from the act itself, from the transgression.
It really is surprisingly common. The psychologist Paul Bloom, he talks about this desire to do something wrong just for the sake of it.
Right.
Even when there's no real gain. It's this paradox, isn't it? The fact that it's wrong is precisely what makes it feel, pleasurable.
It suggests some kind of deep reward mechanism where breaking the rule is the reward.
Exactly. And that right there is what we want to dive into today.
We're going deep on this, looking at this really perplexing human impulse, not just scratching the surface, but really digging into the science behind the science.
We'll pull from neuroscience, psychology, sociology, even a bit of philosophy.
Yeah, trying to figure out why we get this pleasure from transgression and what it really means for us, as people and for society.
It's about getting to the core of this contradiction.
Okay, so let's start where it all begins, really, the brain.
Right.
There's this really interesting split I've read about in the reward system between liking and wanting. Can you sort of unpack that for us, especially thinking about doing something wrong?
Yeah, it's an absolutely crucial distinction. So liking is that pure, simple pleasure you feel. It happens in these specific little areas in the brain, hedonic hotspots, like the nucleus accumbens.
Okay, like the instant enjoyment part.
Exactly. Think tasting amazing chocolate or that feeling of just perfect comfort. Now, wanting, that's different. That's the drive, the motivation, the desire to get something.
And that's dopamine.
That's largely driven by dopamine, yeah. And here's the kicker for transgression. The main buzz might not actually be the immediate liking of the forbidden act itself. Often, it's more about the intense wanting, that anticipation of the forbidden, and then maybe the rush of, getting away with it.
Or feeling like you've beaten the system somehow.
Precisely. That sense of control, of pulling it off. It's more about the chase, the anticipation, and that feeling of success than maybe the thing itself.
That really reframes why some rules feel so tempting to break. It's not just the outcome.
Exactly. A powerful loop. And this leads right into the whole thrill of risk, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Think about rule breaking that actually feels a bit dangerous. Just anticipating the consequences can trigger that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
You get that adrenaline jolt.
Right. Heart pounds a bit.
And then if you do it and you get away with it, boom, you get that dopamine rush as the reward.
It's like a little neurochemical cocktail.
It is. And it can be really addictive, that cycle. Like thrill seekers needing bigger and bigger risks for the same high.
I can totally see how that feeling of control, of cheating the system, adds to the pleasure. Now, something I've been thinking about is how this connects to different neurotypes. I've heard there's a link with ADHD. How does that fit?
It's a really fascinating area. So individuals with ADHD, their brains often work with, let's say, lower baseline levels of dopamine. Their reward system might be sort of underactive.
Okay. Running on a lower charge, maybe.
Kind of, yeah. So to get that needed dopamine boost, that feeling of stimulation and reward, they might actually be drawn more strongly to high stimulation, risky behaviors.
Including breaking rules.
Including rule breaking, yes. So for some people, it might not be just a conscious choice, but almost a way to self-medicate, driven by their neurobiology. It shifts how we see persistent rule breaking sometimes.
Which brings us to the point where it becomes maladaptive, right? If someone has neurological dysregulation, maybe that lower dopamine battery or something like anhedonia where pleasure is hard to feel, does the pursuit of wrongdoing stop being a choice?
That's a really critical point. It absolutely can become more compulsive. Less of a choice, more of a drive stemming from an underlying imbalance, or even, say, deep psychological distress.
So like conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder?
Exactly. Clinically, it can show up in conditions like those. Or it might be a kind of desperate coping mechanism for chronic stress or anxiety. It forces us to look beyond just moral failing. Because if there are biological or deep psychological roots, just punishing the behavior often doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't address the actual cause.
Right. It's not always someone choosing to be bad, but maybe expressing an unmet need in a destructive way.
Okay, beyond the brain chemistry, what about the psychology? Are there specific personality traits involved?
Oh, definitely. Things like impulsivity, acting without fully thinking through the consequences, that's a big one.
Makes sense.
And low conscientiousness, sort of a general disregard for rules and obligations. But a really strong driver is often sensation-seeking.
The craving for novelty, thrills. Exactly, that need for intense experiences. Paul Bloom links this to basic human curiosity, too. That drive to push boundaries, explore limits.
And it's not just personality, right? Our upbringing, our environment must play a huge role.
Absolutely enormous. If you grow up where rules are all over the place, inconsistent, or maybe rebellion is even seen as normal, that shapes things profoundly.
Or trauma, neglect.
Yes. Rule breaking can become a way to cope. Maybe trying to get some control back or just expressing anger and pain when other ways aren't available.
And then there are peers, especially when you're younger.
Hugely influential, particularly in adolescence. If your friends are breaking rules, there's immense pressure to fit in. It can spread like a social contagion.
Reinforced by
often simple things, laughter, shared secrets, that feeling of being in it together. Those positive social exchanges can actually normalize behaviors that might otherwise seem wrong. It happens at a community level.
That normalization is fascinating. And then there's the classic forbidden fruit effect. Why? Why does just telling someone not to do something make it instantly more appealing? It seems backwards.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a really robust psychological finding. Prohibition just seems to dial up our curiosity. We think, if it's forbidden, there must be something valuable or exciting about it.
Like Pandora's box or the apple in Eden.
Exactly. It's deep in our stories. Some think it might even be an evolutionary hangover, that it pushed our ancestors to explore, to challenge norms, which could be adaptive.
But the flip side is?
The flip side is that it can make prohibitions totally backfire, just intensifying the desire to break the rule.
So it can drive good things like innovation, but also just plain old rule breaking.
Okay, let's go even deeper. This concept of jouissance. It sounds like it's way beyond just simple pleasure.
Oh, it is. It's a philosophical, psychoanalytic idea. Jouissance is this type of pleasure that goes beyond basic hedonism, pushes past what Freud called the pleasure principle.
Into experiences that might even involve pain or suffering, or at least intense discomfort, yet they're still intensely desired. It's often linked to really transgressive acts.
Acts that shake up your sense of self.
Exactly. Things that destabilize your identity. It hints at this deep, maybe unconscious, yearning for something more. Self-transcendence, maybe. Fusion. It's not about simple gratification.
And if that's driving someone's actions,
then just making the punishment harsher isn't likely to work, is it?
Right.
It suggests motivations that aren't purely rational, maybe needing deeper psychological or even spiritual approaches, not just deterrence.
That's a really powerful thought, that some transgression taps into something almost existential. Okay, let's connect this to the bigger picture. Society. How does society itself define and maybe even create this paradox? What strikes you about how we decide what's wrong?
Well, the first thing is that wrong isn't fixed. It's incredibly relative, culturally speaking.
Right. Tattoos are a great example. Once seen as deviant in many Western cultures, now pretty mainstream, even art.
Exactly. Societies define deviance based on their own history, their social norms, their economic situation at the time. It's not universal.
So it's a construct, something humans create, which means it can be manipulated.
Precisely. And research backs this up strongly. Deviance is often shaped by who holds power.
Governments, religious figures, corporations?
Yes, they get to set the norms, often reflecting their own interests, and then they use laws, institutions, social pressure to enforce those definitions.
So the very definition of wrong can be used as a tool to control people or marginalize groups.
Absolutely. It can be weaponized.
That's, quite unsettling when you think about it that way. And this leads us to that idea of the normalization of deviance. How does that creep in? How do standards erode?
It's insidious, like a silent killer for ethics. It happens gradually. Small deviations from the rules or standards start happening.
Maybe due to pressure, like work overload leading to shortcuts.
That's a common one. Or maybe overconfidence. We know what we're doing, we can bend this rule. Complacency. Little by little, these deviations become accepted. The baseline shifts downwards.
And leadership plays a key role here, or the lack of it.
Crucially, if leaders tolerate these small deviations or just don't act, they essentially give permission for the standards to slip further. It creates an environment where ethical erosion speeds up.
Which sounds like it opens the door for more destructive leaders to actually gain influence, right?
Yeah.
And that brings us to the leader who seems to enjoy wrongdoing, the dark triad.
Exactly. The dark triad refers to those three nasty personality traits often found together: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Okay, break those down quickly. Narcissism.
Inflated sense of self-importance, constant need for admiration, and a real lack of empathy.
Machiavellianism.
Manipulative, cunning, strategic in exploiting others, very little concern for morality, ends justify the means.
And psychopathy.
The most chilling, maybe. Profound lack of empathy, often superficial charm, impulsive, disregard for others' rights and feelings. And crucially for our topic, they can derive pleasure from illicit acts. Rules are just suggestions, obstacles to overcome.
And these individuals, they don't just stumble into power, do they? They actively seek it out. How do they manage to climb the ladder?
They're very drawn to power and often surprisingly good at getting it. They're masters of manipulation.
How so?
They'll charm superiors while undermining rivals or subordinates. They use what's called surface acting, faking emotions convincingly to appear charismatic or trustworthy.
So charm gets mistaken for leadership potential.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
And they exploit weaknesses in the system. They might create fear, sow division, take credit for others' work, whatever gets them ahead.
It really supports that idea that it's not just about bad apples. It's about broken systems that actually attract and promote these types.
Exactly. Our standard ways of vetting leaders often aren't good enough to catch sophisticated manipulators.
The systems are vulnerable.
They are. Which is why we need to think systemically about prevention, not just reactively about punishment.
And when these leaders do get power, especially those who seem to get a kick out of transgression, the results can be utterly devastating. History gives us some horrifying examples. Mao Zedong, the Great Leap Forward.
A truly tragic case. Mao's push for rapid industrialization in China, 1958 to 61. It led to the deadliest famine in human history. We're talking 30, maybe 45 million deaths.
Driven by
Ideology and disastrous policies based on whim, not science. Like ordering the extermination of sparrows, which completely upset the ecosystem and led to insect plagues destroying crops. It shows how absolute power combined with a disregard for reality and consequence, maybe even a perverse pleasure in imposing will, leads to unimaginable suffering.
Or think about Stalin and the RLC, another example of grand ambition ignoring natural limits.
Absolutely. Stalin wanted cotton independence for the Soviet Union, so massive irrigation projects were started in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Badly built canals diverted the rivers feeding the Aral Sea.
Well, I just shrank.
Catastrophically. It led to ecological collapse, health crises for the people living nearby. They call it the quiet Chernobyl. The long-term damage is immense, a direct result of that regime's hubris.
And it's not just historical. The Amazon deforestation under Jair Bolsonaro's recent presidency, that's happening now.
A very contemporary example. His administration actively encouraged slash-and-burn farming, rolled back environmental protections, opened indigenous lands,
And deforestation rate.
nearly doubled during his term. It's a clear case of environmental dismantling, seemingly driven by a desire to override established norms and prioritize short-term exploitation. The global climate impact is undeniable.
It underscores how vital it is to prevent leaders like that from gaining power. The damage isn't just local, it's global and intergenerational.
Absolutely. This enjoyment of transgression, amplified by power, has these devastating, long-lasting impacts, not just on people, but on the planet itself. It connects everything.
Which brings us to that grand tapestry idea. How do all these systems interact? Let's talk about natural law versus transgression. Is there some kind of built-in conflict here?
Well, natural law theory suggests there are these universal moral principles we can grasp through reason, an innate pull towards cooperation, towards the good.
But then there's this other pull we've been talking about, the pleasure in doing wrong.
Exactly. So there's a fundamental tension, isn't there? Is the transgressive impulse a kind of shadow side of our freedom? Or is it a deviation from our more natural moral state? It's a core question about human nature.
And yet, logically, cooperation seems like the winning strategy, evolutionarily speaking. We should just follow the rules for survival.
Right. Rule following is incredibly adaptive. It allowed us to build complex societies, trust each other, work together. Even kids seem hardwired to conform and enforce norms.
Game theory shows this too, right?
Yeah, models like the iterated prisoner's dilemma show that while being selfish might win in the short term, cooperative strategies like tit for tat, you cooperate, you defect, I defect win out over time. Moral norms likely evolve this way, fostering group survival.
So morality isn't just abstract, it's baked into our success as a species, but that transgressive itch still persists. Could it also be adaptive somehow? Not always bad.
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe that impulse, while disruptive, also fuels innovation, challenging norms, breaking outdated rules. That's often how progress happens, right?
Social reformers, scientific pioneers, they were transgressing the status quo.
Exactly. So perhaps societies need a balance. Enough cooperation for stability, but enough room for constructive transgression to allow for change and adaptation.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also sounds like things can get messy fast. Even well-intentioned actions in these complex systems, they can have unpredictable results. Chaos theory comes in here.
It does. Chaos theory's butterfly effect tells us that in complex systems like society, tiny initial changes can lead to massive, unpredictable consequences down the line.
So even an ethically sound decision could, theoretically, lead to unforeseen negative outcomes.
It's possible. It means we can't just focus on simple cause and effect. We need robust ethical principles and the ability to adapt, because outcomes aren't always predictable. It really highlights how interconnected and sensitive things are.
And going back to game theory, it shows how cooperation emerges, but how does that wrong for pleasure impulse mess things up?
Well, game theory shows cooperation evolves for mutual benefit, even requiring some self-sacrifice. The wrong for pleasure impulse acts like a disruption to that equilibrium. If enough individuals prioritize that transgressive pleasure over cooperation, it erodes trust and can unravel the social fabric.
Which sounds a bit like moral entropy, this idea that societies tend towards fragmentation, like thermodynamics, but for morals.
It's a useful analogy, yeah. Moral entropy suggests societies can move from order to disorder, maybe fueled by things like information overload, polarization, the individual drive for gain, overriding the collective good.
Leading to social decay. Sounds bleak.
It can be, but maybe it's also a natural cycle. Perhaps disruption is sometimes necessary for renewal, for new freedoms to emerge, even if it causes suffering along the way. The challenge is developing moral adaptability to navigate those cycles without total collapse.
Okay, so society is this complex adaptive system, and individual acts of transgression aren't just isolated blips, they can spread. Network theory helps explain this.
Absolutely. Individual acts, through social contagion and feedback loops, can lead to large-scale shifts, like that normalization of deviance we talked about. It becomes an emergent property of the system.
And network theory shows how.
It shows that deviant groups aren't necessarily isolated. They're often connected to mainstream networks, allowing behaviors, ideas, even illicit content to spread far wider than you might think.
And positive reinforcement within those networks.
Like laughter, approval, status. It's called deviancy training, can accelerate that spread.
Yeah.
So interventions need to think about the network dynamics, not just targeting individuals in isolation.
Okay, this has been a deep dive into the why. So what do we do about it? How can we guide this powerful, sometimes dangerous impulse towards something better? Build more ethical, resilient societies?
It really has to start early. Cultivating ethical development right from childhood.
How? Not just separate ethics classes.
No, it needs to be woven into everything. Holistic moral education. Using history, science, literature to explore real-world ethical dilemmas and consequences.
Getting kids to think critically about choices.
Exactly. Creating safe classroom environments where they can wrestle with tough questions, challenge ideas respectfully, understand their own impulses, develop what you might call reflective control over just reacting.
And what about leadership? How do we stop those dark triad types from gaming the system?
That's absolutely critical. We need much more proactive selection processes. Robust, multi-layered systems designed to spot ethical character, not just charm or ambition.
Like what specifically?
Comprehensive background checks, yes, but also behavioral interviews focused on ethical scenarios, psychological assessments, rigorous reference checks that dig deep, evaluating cultural fit in terms of integrity.
But it's not just vetting individuals, is it? The system needs safeguards.
Absolutely. Strong, independent boards, real checks and balances, separation of powers, whistleblower protections that actually work. Transparency, anything that dilutes concentrated power and makes abuse harder. The key is actually implementing these things effectively, especially against skilled manipulators. That's the ongoing challenge.
A huge challenge. Okay, so beyond leadership, how do we build societal resilience more broadly?
It's got to be multi-pronged. We need a balance between deterrence, clear consequences for harmful actions, and rehabilitation. Punishment sets boundaries, protects the community.
But rehabilitate
aims to actually transform individuals, especially when we recognize those underlying neurological or psychological factors we discussed, addressing the root cause.
And strengthening governance overall.
Yes. Constant vigilance on checks and balances, transparency, accountability, promoting an ethical culture everywhere in business, government, communities, Leaders have to walk the talk.
And focusing on the system, not just the bad apples.
Exactly. Designing systems that make it harder for destructive people to thrive in the first place.
You mentioned something earlier, positive deviance. Can this transgressive impulse actually be harnessed for good?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's such an inspiring idea. Positive deviants are those individuals or groups who find better solutions to problems by doing things differently, by unconventionally succeeding where others fail. They often subtly transgress norms or standard practices.
So they use that impulse to innovate.
Precisely. They drive positive, pro-social change. It shows that the same energy that can be destructive, if channeled constructively, can be incredibly valuable.
Wow. So we've really covered a lot of ground, this wrong for pleasure impulse. It's deeply human, complex, rooted in our biology, our psychology, shaped by our culture.
Yeah, it's a true paradox. Sometimes it's just that little thrill of stepping on the grass. Other times, amplified by power and flawed systems, it leads to absolute catastrophe.
It really throws that core tension into sharp relief, doesn't it? Our drive to cooperate versus this persistent pull towards transgression.
It does. But maybe the key takeaway is that the energy itself isn't inherently bad. That drive for novelty, for pushing boundaries, it can be a source of incredible innovation and positive change.
So the final thought for everyone listening, if that allure of the forbidden, that curiosity is so deeply wired into us, how can we consciously harness it?
Right. How can we individually and collectively channel that drive for novelty, not towards dismantling things, but towards building better ones?
Turning the pleasure of wrongdoing into the thrill of genuine progress? What small transgression against your own usual thinking might unlock your next big insight?
This is DigitView.